Further, Mr. Moynihan, you each represent Charles DuBois.
That's correct, Your Honor.
And Mrs. Charles DuBois is present with you.
Yes, it is.
This matter is on for sentencing today. I've received various requests for audio-visual coverage of today's proceedings. In light of the fact that it is a sentencing, I will allow that coverage. Mr. DuBois was found guilty following a jury trial of 4 counts of murder in the first degree, as well as 1 count of arson in the first degree. I've ordered the pre-sentence report. I have it. I've reviewed it. I've also received a report from the Center for Community Alternatives submitted by the defense on behalf of Mr. DuBois. I will forward each of these reports to the Department of Corrections.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Do the people move sentencing?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Moran, would the people like to be heard?
We would. First, Judge, I received this CCA report this morning. I do like to read them. I didn't have time, and I understand that it was prepared on short notice. I am troubled in some sense by it, in that it says in conclusion that Mr. DuBois' level of culpability is unknown regarding this case. That simply isn't true. Mr. DuBois' culpability wasn't decided by me. It wasn't decided by you. It was decided by 12 people who sat in that jury box and listened to all the evidence and then returned a verdict. So with all due respect to the Center for Community Alternatives, that's ridiculous. I do want to thank a few people whose hard work led to the results found in this trial, particularly members of the Syracuse Police Department, including Detective Berardi and Cowan and other members of the police department, members of the Syracuse Fire Department, Captain Ed Kozakowski, Lieutenant Gene Johnson, among many others who were there doing their very best at great risk themselves to try to save the lives of Susan Wagner and Karina DuBois and Hunter DuBois and Michael DuBois. I want to thank Ron Ryan and in particular Joe Galloway, without whose help I couldn't do my job. And I want to talk in particular, Judge, about Alan Williams, whose painstaking efforts, along with other members of the investigators at the Syracuse Fire Department, sifting through this evidence, documenting this evidence, lead to the conclusion that this was an intentionally set fire at 253 Fifth Street. One of the things Investigator Williams talked about a lot in his testimony was the scientific method, right? We develop hypotheses, we test hypotheses, and we see whether or not they withstand that testing. We try to eliminate them to the best we can, and then we are left with only one hypothesis. And in this case, Judge, that the only hypothesis that remained in this case was that this was not an accident. This was not a faulty toaster. This was not bad wiring. This was not a cigarette left unattended. This was not an 8-year-old playing with matches. This was an intentionally set fire in 2 different places. Based on the timeline, based on the dynamics of the fire and how fast it moved, based on how fast it was rolling when police officers respond minutes after the 911 call and minutes after Mr. DuBois left, based on his inconsistent stories told to Detective Berardi and Cowan, based on some history of family strife. There's really only one hypothesis that withstands any testing, and that is that Mr. DuBois was responsible for setting this fire intentionally with his family asleep upstairs at just after 3 o'clock in the morning. They're going to know the torture they put me through. I would do it with my bare hands. Those are his words. I hesitate when I stand up to talk in terms of good and evil, but it's hard in this case not to. Right? Mr. DuBois has very good and qualified lawyers who did a very good job for him. They certainly thought of and evaluated the defense of justification, of not responsible by reason of mental disease or defect. And the thrust of that defense is that my client did not appreciate his actions. He could not have known, didn't even realize this was wrong, right? And they retained a doctor, and that doctor presumably did his job, and then they decided not to do that, not to present that defense. And it's reasonable to conclude based on that the reason they didn't offer that defense is that he did appreciate it. Right? The reason that maybe he never would acknowledge his own role in all this is because he did understand. Talk reluctantly about good and evil. If he appreciated what he was doing, I don't know what else to call this. And evil deserves only one sentence in this case, Judge. And that is a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. And I would ask the court to impose that sentence for these acts, for the murder of Susan Wagner, for the murder of Michael DuBois and Karina DuBois and Hunter DuBois. Thank you.
Mr. Moran, thank you as well. Mr. Zucker, Mr. Moynihan, have you each had the opportunity to review the pre-sentence report?
We have.
Would you like to be heard?
Judge, we would like to be heard.
Go ahead.
I've thought a lot about what to say to Your Honor today, and I think I will say this. No man is beyond redemption. I know I've practiced in front of Your Honor for more than 20 years, nearly 20 years now. No man is beyond redemption. I know that Your Honor believes that. There is no question here that Mr. DuBois had a very difficult upbringing, that Mr. DuBois suffers from a condition known as paranoid schizophrenia. And Your Honor knows as well as I do that in our country, many other countries as well, your access to health care is different depending on who you are. He was never treated for this condition. And during the course of this case, one of the reasons it took so long was because Kenny and I tried to determine whether that was in fact the case. And we still don't know the extent of it today. What Mr. Moran says about evil, I do not believe that anybody is inherently evil. I believe that people are good and that people want good things in their lives. But the truth of the matter is that in this country, when you don't have health insurance or access to medical providers, the treatment that you get is this. Everyone waits till there's a manic episode, then they take you into the emergency room. The emergency room stabilizes you for a day or two. They give you enough medications for maybe a day or two, and they throw you out into the street. And when people succumb to various actions that are not in conformity with our law and that cannot be understood by others, everyone is outraged. Everyone, how could there be a shooting in Las Vegas? How could there be these shootings in schools? When in fact, the truth of the matter is, people's underlying mental illness is not looked at closely. They are rejected by our medical system and are thrown right back into our communities. And then when something terrible happens, everybody holds their head and says, why? I'll tell you why, Judge. Mr. DuBois was raised in poverty. He did not have access to medical care, other than his family every now and again taking him to the emergency room when they thought that he had an episode. I'm not saying that as an excuse for the behavior that occurred here, but that is certainly something that the court must take into account in this case, as set forth full in the CCA report we produced to the court. We tried very hard to determine, and Mr. Moran knows well, he's speaking for the cameras when he says that he's evil. Okay? There is no such thing as a human being evil. Very rare. This is certainly not that case. Mr. Moran also knows that the standard for whether or not my client is legally competent to stand trial based on his mental disability is far greater and far different than what everybody imagines that to be. The only thing he has to know is who I am. He has to know that he's been charged with a crime, charged with something wrong, and he has to be able to assist me in my defense. Those are the only three requirements for Mr. DuBois. to stand trial before you. That is a far greater and overall encompassing standard than, is he able to function in society? Should people have seen some clear signs of mental illness and gotten him treatment for that? Those are far different questions than whether he's mentally competent to stand trial before you. That is one of the reasons, with your Honor's grace, I might add, that you allowed us the time to explore fully. And I appreciate Mr. Moran's machinations about why we didn't call certain witnesses, why didn't we put forth certain defenses. Your Honor knows exactly why that was. He didn't qualify under our legal standard to be mentally incompetent to stand trial before you. And that is why we had this trial. No man, Judge, I know this to be true after practicing nearly 20 years in front of you. I know you believe this in your heart. No man is beyond redemption. No man is evil. And as far as rehashing the evidence in this case, let's not do that. The jury has issued its verdict. But the evidence in this case by no means was overwhelming. No means was overwhelming. Mr. Moran's investigator and fire expert misrepresented his credentials on his resume to the tune of misrepresenting tremendously what his qualifications were. This theory of it's not A or B, so it must be C works great on paper, but it does not work in the real world. Okay? It does not work in the real world. Okay? There were several other things that could have caused that fire on that stairwell. For example, a firefighter falling through the floor, carrying debris with him. The fact that they broke a hole in the roof right above the stairwell and vented all that hot air and flames through that roof right above the stairwell. The fact that the firefighter said when he was rescued from the basement, well, there was fire in the stairwell. So let's not rehash the evidence in this case. The jury gave its verdict. Its verdict is what it is. I tremendously respect that. What I believe that I will see from your Honor today, not mercy. I'm not asking for mercy, because I know, or leniency, because I know that the sentence your Honor is prepared to issue in this case will be in no way merciful or lenient. What I am asking you, Judge, is that no man is beyond redemption. That Mr. DuBois is 21 years old. His brain is barely formed, and it formed poorly with a terrible disorder that was never addressed. That's the truth of this case. I ask for your Honor's reasoned and legal equity. That is what I ask. To give this man a chance that someday that he can address his mental illness, that someday he can rejoin society after paying the price for the crime that he was convicted of. No man should be denied that right. No man. I ask your Honor not to deny him that right. I do not ask you to sentence him to life without the possibility of parole, because no man is beyond redemption. There was no B for the family. I heard no such testimony in this court. Heard no such testimony in this court. No murder gets committed without a motive. I heard no motive in this court. No motive for why Mr. DuBois would murder his mother, who was his best friend, yet nobody but his family. Tiny little baby, what beef did he have with that little baby? None. But the jury has rendered its verdict. Now is not the time for those arguments. I ask for your Honor's reasoned and just verdict that I know you will issue, because I know you as a man for a long time now. Thank you.
Thank you as well. Mr. DuBois, this is your opportunity. Is there anything, sir, that you would like to say?
No, Your Honor.
Nothing, sir.
No. And that was what I had to say to my family.
Well, this, in my opinion, simply stated, was an an evil and a wicked act that is difficult, if not impossible, to comprehend. The despicable callousness of what you did to your own family cannot be adequately addressed by any sentence that any judge can impose on this earth. If I thought it would trouble you in any way, Mr. DuBois, in any way, I would order as part of my sentence today that each day of this sentence you be required, you be made to listen to those horrible, chilling, and terrifying 911 calls made by your own mother and your brother as they pled for help and gasped for life because of this fire that you quite clearly set. Each day should begin that way for you. Fortunately, through the exercise of sound discretion by the people, the jury didn't have to listen to those haunting 911 calls. But I could clearly tell the impact on those 911 operators who testified about taking those calls. They testified here that those calls were the absolute worst calls they had ever received. The worst calls. In your trial, the jury and I saw the worst in what people can be, but we also saw the best in what people can be. Heroes these days are hard to find, but sometimes heroes are right among us, so close to us that maybe we can't see them, and we don't take the time to acknowledge them. Today, on behalf of the jury, I will acknowledge them today because they appeared in this courtroom, Syracuse firefighters, unselfish, unsung, and I'm sure most uncomfortable with this praise, but most deserving of it. Is this as difficult as this trial was emotionally for all of us? I certainly feel fortunate to have been in your presence, and I'm sure the jury felt that way as well. While those firefighters ran into that fire without any hesitation to try to save complete strangers in blinding smoke and searing heat, falling through steps that had collapsed because of this fire, unimaginable circumstances for anybody to deal with. While that was happening, you, Mr. DuBois, you were parading around the neighborhood, all the while being watched by cops' cameras. You then came up with what I consider to be ludicrous and pathetic stories about your whereabouts while your family took their last breath. That just coincidentally, you were walking your dog in a snowstorm at 3 a.m. when the fire began, or that you were in the process of breaking up with a girlfriend at that time. You were going out in that kind of weather at that time of morning to speak with her, or you were being chased by some phantom gang member. They were also out at that time of that awful storm at that time of night. Or, finally, what I've read in this pre-sentence report, that this tragic fire was caused by an electrical problem caused by some family member's negligence for rewiring in the house. As pitiful and incredible and shameful as any excuses ever offered anywhere at any time. Pitiful. With respect to the issue of leniency or mercy or reasoned decision-making, whatever we may call it today, your attorneys did an excellent job on your behalf, and I would be the first to say so. They prepared a mitigation report for you, and I've reviewed that mitigation report. This certainly concerns me, and perhaps speaks volumes. parents or other caretakers can help them learn to self-soothe and cope with anxiety. But in Charlie's house, referring to you, he said that his family's relationships were generally quite the opposite. Quote, "My family never looked out for each other like that," he said. Quote, "They'll throw you under the bus any chance they get. Talk behind your back, everything like that. They're fucking sharks." That's the mitigation. Mr. DuBois, the only mercy you will get from me today is that your life will go on in prison, which is better than the sentence you imposed on your own family. That death sentence you imposed is not available for me to impose on you. As a result of your conviction for murder in the first degree as it relates to Susan Wagner, the sentence is life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. With regard to your conviction for murder in the second degree regarding Michael DuBois, my sentence is life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. With regard to your conviction for murder in the first degree as it relates to Karina DuBois, my sentence is life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. With regard to Hunter DuBois, for the conviction for murder in the first degree, the sentence is life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. With regard to each of the convictions for murder in the first degree, those sentences to run concurrently or at the same time. With regard to the conviction for arson in the first degree, the sentence is 25 years determinate, to be followed by a period of post-release supervision of 5 years. That sentence is also to run concurrently with the sentences just imposed. You have a right to appeal. In order to preserve that right, you must file a written notice of appeal within 30 days of today's date. You have the right to have an attorney represent you on that appeal. If you can't afford one, one would be assigned to represent you. Surcharge, please.
Mandatory surcharge of $300. There's also a $50 maintenance and a $25 fine.
Thank you.
Your Honor, I have one thing I'd like to put on the record. I'd like the opportunity to provide the court or to the Department of Corrections directly a psychiatric report that we haven't been able to complete yet. We expect it to be done soon. I'd like to provide that forwarded on with the other material.
I'd be happy to do that, sir.
I appreciate that.